This is Andrew Hunziker, CPA, founder of Dope CFO. Today, we are going to be interviewing Ramsey Sessions down in Alabama. Also an interesting day as this is the day after the elections. And as of right this second, we still don't know who the president's going to be. What we do know is Election day, yet again, there were big winners on the marijuana law side. So we've talked about this for quite some time. Marijuana, and especially medical cannabis, is very bipartisan. And so that's why it's winning elections left and right every year that we come up with a new election, whether it's state, county, federal, whatever. And so a good example is my home state, Oklahoma, is very, very red. My current state, Oregon, is very, very blue. They're both very, very active cannabis states with around 10,000 cannabis companies in each one of those states. So last night, we had some states, Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota all came online, as well as Mississippi. And we had a few other initiatives as well. We've got the MORES Act in Congress around federal banking coming up. So it was a very good night for cannabis anyway on that front. So let's jump into our podcast with Ramsey. Let me introduce Ramsey, and I will let you correct me and add to, delete. But Ramsey is in Alabama, which has been a very anti-cannabis state, I would say, over time. But I think we're going to get into that as well. But you've been a CPA there for quite some time. You've also had your own firm for over 10 years. Interestingly, it says here October 2010. That's almost exactly when I was a CFO, sure, the first 10 years of the century. Sure. And I left and went on my own around October 2010 as well. And you're certified both in Texas and Alabama. I still state Texas is going to be the biggest cannabis state of all time when all is said and done, with their population and farmland and capital. So anyway, jump in and let's introduce Ramsey and tell me a little more about your background and leading up, and then we'll get into specific questions.
Sure. Ramsey Sessions, and here in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm really in Trustful, which is a little suburb outside of Birmingham. However, it does, a lot of my clients do come from what we call the metropolitan area. Birmingham's unique that each city and each county pretty much stands on its own laws and its own administration. So we don't have one centralized government when it comes to municipalities and county government. Born in 1963, right out of high school, 4 days, I went right into the Marine Corps. A lot of my life had, at that point, been dictated towards black and white. I like to say black and white. Issues are black and white. Issues are black and white. And so growing up, when it came to drugs, drinking, and premarital sex, it was always black and white. You don't or you do. There was no gray. And so that transition into the Marine Corps kind of followed that thought practice. This was in 1982. And then the Marine Corps was an easy transition because its policies and procedures were also anti-drinking, drugs, and not necessarily premarital sex, but a little more father-mother figure than would have been there if I'd just gone straight to college. And so my uncle had been a Marine. I went into the Marine Corps, mainly to get out of the house more than anything. After spending 4 years in the Corps, went to college. You know, the philosophy at that time was you either get out of high school, you go to college, you get a job, you go in the military. After you go to college, you get a job. After you go in the military, you go to college, you get a job. And that's the way it was. And you know, going into college, my father said, I wanted to be a history major. My father said, no, you'll never make any money doing that. I wish I had done it because it's so, to me, it's just so fascinating. But accounting at that time in the pre-90s was a very good field to be in, because my first job offer was actually an accounting firm for $12,000 a year. This was 1989. However, I decided at that point to take another offer in the industry of oil and gas, Southern Natural Company, Southern Natural Gas. At that point, my philosophy was I'm going to do what's right and to get ahead at that point, to take care of me and mine, and to make those goals and move in that direction. After working in the private industry, I went to work for government of Alabama, state of Alabama, as a revenue auditor because I had oil and gas experience. And so I became what's called a foreign audit specialist. I traveled outside of Alabama, mostly to Texas, where I spent a lot of time in Houston auditing what we call severance taxes in Alabama. A lot of people don't know that we have a lot of natural gas and we have a lot of oil coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. We have a lot of rigs down there. And so I was there and lived in Montgomery at the time, where our capital is. And at that point, my wife says, we're going to have a baby, we're going to move to Birmingham. And I transitioned over to sales tax. And a few years after doing that, my father, who was an accountant as well, not degreed, he was a public accountant, had a practice that had been in continuation since after World War II. He was the second owner of it. And in the year 2000, I actually left the state to work in public practice, which is what I always wanted to do, was public practice. I didn't know how hard it was going to be because I didn't know how well I had it with the revenue and the benefits that the state offered or private company offered. After 10 years, unfortunately, I had to tell my dad to take a hike, and that's in 2010 that I took over. And so a lot's changed in that time period, not only in my life and the way I think about things, but the business in general as well. It's changed far faster than I ever thought it would.
So, okay, well, that's a great background. I was just like noting the things that we have in common. I was born in '64. I'm from Oklahoma. I actually was a CFO of an oil and gas company for 10 years. Was in public accounting as well. And then my son, who's 16 now, he's definitely set on, he's entering the Marine Corps the day he turns 18 in 2 years. He's made that decision.
It's a different force now. I don't think I and a lot of my fellow Marines back then could ever do what they do today.
So he's excited.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great start out of right at 18 before college. And I got into accounting a little later. So I kind of fell myself accidentally into cannabis because it just exploded here in Oregon. And I accidentally got a client, is what I say. But when did you decide to jump in or even think about cannabis? Because it's not ever on every street corner in Alabama, that's for sure.
Sure. Well, there's two lines of thought that made my decision in this. And the first was, I'm 57 years old. I've got a small accounting practice, about 50-50 accounting and tax. And tax season's a pain when you do about 1,100 tax returns. And I started to think that maybe that method of my business plan should be changed. And so a year or two ago, I took the AICPA had a CAS class, Client Advisory Services. And so I took the time and effort to go through that class, and got the badge for it. And it made me more interested in the accounting side, because when you've got your own firm and it's a small firm and you're dealing with mom and pops, the accounting is not like the books. Okay, I know it's never really like the books, but it's a totally different type of accounting that I was used to. Whereas if we're looking at the client advisory services route, it's more in line with what I thought I would be doing 20-something years ago. Which is a more of true bookkeeping, what I like to call near real-time accounting, is what I want to focus on with my clients. And with clients advisory services, it really iterated that near real-time services, so that the client, in my case, with all my clients, it's after the fact. at the end of the month, get your bank statements, check stubs, and you go through routine. But with near real time is almost on a daily basis, you are reconciling the accounts. You're making sure the adjustments are right. So you're putting a lot more energy and thought into what you're doing. And so that was the one thing. The goal at that point was fewer clients with residual monthly income at a greater level than what I'm receiving currently. Okay. I figure I got 10 to 15 years left, so I need to position myself because I want to get out of tax season.
Yeah.
Stuff, tax season used to be, in 1986, they had a law change. Okay. It didn't change again until the 90s. And then it didn't change again, maybe once or twice in the 90s, but now all of a sudden it's almost yearly. And it's kind of hard to do tax planning in a way. Right now I had a client ask something and I said, hey, that's good for 2020, but in 2021, we'll have to see how the election turns out and how Congress turns out. And so that was the one route, is the residual income route, trying to get into that position. The other one was is finding that niche. And with Alabama, back in the 90s, began with what's called Carley's Law, getting into the process of allowing CBD oils for Carley, who had a young child with seizures. And so needed the oil for her to, and it took a long time for Alabama to realize. It took a lot of marketing to the legislatures, a lot of special interest groups to the legislature to get them to come around to the idea of marijuana, because Alabama is still a moral and religious centered state. Okay, it's changing. Okay. And so we're seeing now that with this current legislature, that actually, if it hadn't been for COVID, the medical marijuana bill would have passed. It had already been passed by the Senate. It was going to the House. The House favored it, and it was going to go along. But I could see Alabama. I could see the states around us. I think Florida is the closest one to us. That there's opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. Alabama, we got plenty of land, for the hemp industry.
Yeah.
Where there's not a lot of states around us that is focused on this niche. What's unique about Alabama is that it's the old joke of, at least we're not Mississippi. Okay, we're last in education, we're 49th. Well, at least we're not Mississippi. And it's a joke around the Southeast that Alabama and Mississippi were the butt of most jokes. And so what we were trying to do, not necessarily to get ahead of Mississippi, but is to recognize that, for one, there is a use for the product. And the number two is, like everyone else, it's the tax revenue.
Yes, for the states.
And when gambling became legal throughout the South, except for Alabama, because of the moral and religious aspects of it, and we still don't have a lottery. We do have the Indian casinos, but it's only the bingo machines. It's not table gambling. Is that we're seeing money just forced out of Alabama all over the place. When the Powerball is up to whatever amount, you just see the revenues coming in from the stores that surround Alabama, Georgia being the closest one from where I'm at. And so I was hoping that Alabama would get into the medical marijuana dispensaries early so that we could lead the way. But unfortunately, Mississippi is now leading the way. We still have time because they're, Tennessee, Georgia, other states surrounding us have not yet implemented such acts and bills. And so I'm hoping that in the future, hopefully the next session, which is in February, that we'll see it at some point on, it may not be this year, may be midterms next time. So depending on how bad they want to push it.
Well, so that's great. And so it's awesome that you identified it early as well, because this is definitely sweeping the nation, and it
Mhm.
makes sense from a voting standpoint, from a tax standpoint, from jobs, like you say, keeping the money in the state. Our
Mhm.
states need money now. So I think it's coming there. So it's awesome that you're in early as well. Um, what what are some of the key, you talked a little bit about this, but what are some of the services that you're going to be advising? Is it more of the client advisory services and maybe less tax returns
Um, I
to
love
the
tax. I love tax only because I like sticking it to the man. My clients know that I'll go to the mat for them. And
That's all.
actually, I lose money in tax sometimes because I have clients that have children that they'll bring in their child's W-2 and say, "Hey, how much are they getting back?" And I said, "They're getting back $10." And they said, "Well, don't worry about it. We're not doing a return." I said, "No, I'm going to do a return for free for you because that $10, uh, it belongs to your child. It doesn't belong to the state of Alabama. They didn't deserve
Yeah.
it. They don't
Well,
deserve what they get now." So,
Well, right
um,
there, what you just said is a great advertisement for client,
mm,
because there's almost no issue dearer to the cannabis person
oh,
than
yeah.
someone who will go to the mat for them on the tax side. And because they do, rightly so, they're getting an unfair deal right off the bat.
Yeah,
Um,
they are. And, you're a practitioner just like I am, and I deal with the IRS all the time. And, it doesn't scare me. It doesn't scare me like it used to because you deal with them so much. The client
yeah,
gets a letter and they're freaking out. And you're going, "That's nothing."
yeah,
Um, but it's easier for me with 20 years experience to say, okay, this is wrong. This is why it's wrong. And this is what we should pursue. The problem is that with COVID, and even prior to COVID, things with the state and the government, federal and other local governments, is they're slow. They're slow. And so, with the potential for audits in this industry, uh, I'm expecting to see the action to get a lot faster and quicker. And
well,
so,
coupled with that question, then what do you think are some of the reasons, and particularly this is a great question for you because you are in Alabama, where probably there may be a stigma still. Why do you think people in Alabama and elsewhere might not want to serve cannabis clients, or
yeah,
keeping this
yeah,
as an underserved industry?
right. And this is just from my opinion. Okay, my feeling with dealing with my peers and other individuals is it's almost like the path of least resistance. It's you get set in the way you're doing things, you get comfortable, and it's easy to not go outside of your area of expertise, especially in bigger firms where not only is it going to cost you money to service a new niche, but it's going to cost you man hours. Do I have to add more people on? Well, then I have to increase the workspace and on
Yeah.
down the line. And there's this stigmatism about marijuana still not being legal federally. So I think even though the shareholders and the firm owners may be liberal in thought that, hey, it should be legal, I think the firms themselves as an organism are very conservative in that it takes a lot for it to move into a new direction. It's like, I kind of explain it like e-filing. You know, there are still, the IRS had to force everybody to e-file if you did more than 10 returns. And at that time, I was hearing from my peers are complaining because they didn't want to e-file.
Yeah.
It's something new that they're going to have to deal with. And so I think that more than anything else is the driving factor of why this industry is underserved in where it is served, and in areas like Alabama, such where it's not being served. I don't even hardly think it's being thought about, honestly,
Do you,
because
well,
nothing's on the
related
rules, nothing's on the books.
And related to that, what do you see are the next steps in Alabama to moving this? And are you getting involved kind of at the grassroots level with the people there that are trying to move this forward?
It's going to happen. I think it'll happen. It may happen before gambling, honestly, to tell you the truth. Carly's Law back then set the pace for the inevitability of this happening. Okay, so once the camel's nose got under the tent, it opened up the possibility. I think what's driving this also is that we're having, I hate to say this, but we're having the older generations die out and come out of the political arena. And we're seeing a lot younger, a lot more open-minded individuals get into politics. And not only that, but their views are different. And so if you know anything about Georgia, Atlanta really is not really people that were actually born in Atlanta. It's a lot of influx of people from all over the United States coming to work into Atlanta. Same thing with Alabama. We have Huntsville with the space program. We have Mobile with all our ports and the Boeing plant. And so they're bringing their ideas with them. And we're seeing that it's not the big boogie monster that has always been played to us, that it's a gateway drug to other things. And so the attitudes are changing. Those people that are my age with our aches and pains are looking for alternatives to medications. And it's not that we feel like it's our God-given right to have it, but we should have access to what we believe, even though it's psychological, even if it's just what we believe will help us not only mentally but physically.
Yes, and
so it's changing in that respect. Gambling, I don't. That's a whole different story. That may come about, but I think medical marijuana definitely. If not this next session, we meet every year. If not this next session, the next session after that, and maybe for midterms in 2023.
That's great, and I think it's moving that way. And you hit it on the head. This is actually good for the population is aging. There was just a story we referred to in our live last week about a whole lot of seniors are accessing now marijuana for pain, inflammation, anxiety, sleep, depression, and they're using it purely for medicine. They're using it more than once a week. And many of these people had never touched marijuana before age 60. And so they're getting it that, the days of pain pills and going to the doctor for another set of pills, we're all tired of that game. It doesn't work.
And I think the opioid crisis has a lot to do with it as well, because I don't know about where you are, but in Alabama, I have several pharmacies that we deal with, and they're regulated as to how much they can dispense on a daily basis. And so I've noticed the revenue in my pharmacies has really decreased because of that. And that just tells me that that's one healthcare option that's going to be off the plate for a lot of people.
Finally, which will be great. So let me get down towards our end here. Let's ask real quick about Dope CFO. How did we help you take your practice in a new direction to help these cannabis clients?
Well, I'm the type of person that I don't like to reinvent the wheel. And so before I start anything, I do a lot of research. And there's not a lot of organizations out there that provide this type of structure into getting into the cannabis industry. Because, I'm in Alabama, I'm doing it basically whole cloth, because there's not a lot of people out there that in my area that I'm aware of, that I'm in contact with. And so by just the virtue of having the templates, the program, the samples, the drafts, the peer group with everyone else able to bounce ideas off of, is very conducive to how I operate. And so to me, it was a no-brainer that the initial investment is going to be earned, return on investment is going to be a lot greater than the investment I put in on the front end. But it's still a lot of hard work, but y'all have done most of it. So that appeases my laziness when it comes to this thing.
We really are similar because I don't like to reinvent the wheel either. And so I actually wasted probably 2 or 3 months looking for a program like ours that didn't exist when I got into this, because I was like, oh, I need these work papers, but they don't exist. And so,
absolutely. And it was the Accounting Today, I think, is where I saw the ad for y'all. I think either y'all were interviewed or there was an advertisement in there that struck my interest out. And so at that point, I did a lot of research. There's not a lot out there from the AICPA.
Yeah. So
I think this is the first year they're actually going to have a conference
on it.
Yeah. They got one book, and it just amazed me how, okay, if you follow the plan, 90 days, then you want to succeed at some point. You're driving forward, and you get out of it as much as you put into it.
Yes.
It's not an overnight, hey, I'm making tens of thousands of dollars a month. It's never that way, especially located where I am, and having to market outside of my region.
So, well, thank you. That's great. And that's the way it is. And I tell people on the call, this isn't a get rich quick scenario scheme or whatever. This is building a firm, a 6 or 7 figure firm over several years that we want. And this is the space to be in. So it's super exciting.
Absolutely.
I'm super passionate about it. Let's end the call with this final question. What is it that most excites you about cannabis and or your practice in the upcoming year and years ahead?
Actually, I think what excites me the most is the potential for being a leader in my region and in my area. Is that people know now to come to me because I know tax. Okay, well, I want people to come to me because I know the industry. I know the people. I know the industry. I know the ins and outs, and I want to sound like I know what I'm doing.
Well, that's a great answer, and that's what we're trying to teach as well, is becoming that VIP. You're an expert, you're an instructor, you participate in the niche, and you know all things accounting, tax, operations, politics, etc. And that gets around, and it's a great to be. I'm on the West Coast where it's just been entrenched for decades out here. And so I think if I was starting out, I would love to be in a state that's brand new, like Texas or Alabama or Kentucky or wherever. That's where there's going to be massive growth. But anyway, I wanted to say thank you so much for being on the show. It was awesome. And we're going to put all your details. Do you want to real quickly just mention where your website is, or?
Sure. It's real easy. www.sessionscpa.net.
Okay, and Sessions is SESSIONS.
SSIONS. Yes, and just to let the people out there listening, Jeff Sessions is a relative, but it's so far back in the distant that we don't know. We wouldn't know one side of the family from the other.
Okay, so
and I've been asked that several times from at cannabis conferences.
I'm sure, yeah, because he was not in the cannabis camp. But well, that is awesome. So thank you so much for being on the show. If other people want to find us at dopecfo.com, you can also email us at bbe@dopecfo.com, and we'll get right back to you about the program.